Yeah,
more, I think, conversational.
for sure. Good.
I'm excited.
I'm excited too. All right, so we're a few minutes early, but showing that we're live. So if you are here for the live cast on Reproductive Justice 2022, the time is now. You are in the right place, my friends. So I am just attending to a few technical matters on my end and waiting for some people to find us. And if you have found us, welcome. And I do my best to look at the comments to make sure that it's an appropriate, respectful environment during this. We do appreciate when you participate as we go, ask questions, make your comments. If you'd like to begin by indicating for us who you are, where you're joining us from in the world today, and maybe what an intention is for being here, that would most certainly be welcome. So I'll give us again, like I said, a minute or two for some folks to find us. Yeah, I'll share it on a few other places, and then we'll officially get rolling with our conversation here in a few moments. We're being joined by Dr. Orixa Bowers from the state of Tennessee. I'm in the state of Ohio, and if you've seen any of those maps posted in recent days, you know we've probably got a lot on our minds tonight. So we thank you for taking the time to join us in real time. Okay. Okay, okay, okay. My cat is here. She's meowing. You may hear her in the back. So again, if you're just finding us right now, you're in the right place for our conversation on Reproductive Justice 2022. It looks like several of you are with us live. If you'd like to use the comments on this live cast to indicate who you are, where you're joining us from in the world tonight, and maybe setting an intention of what you'd like to get out of this conversation, we would very much appreciate you doing that. This is Misty. Gee, she almost showed up on camera. My cat did. Oh,
Misty has something to say too.
oh, she is a very outspoken pussy. That's for certain, and she probably does have a lot to say. So, Orisha, how are things just in general going on in Tennessee right now? And then I'll formally introduce you.
In Tennessee, people are there is a mix of shock. There's
Hmm.
a mix of shock, some desperation, some anger, and a lot of organizing. There's a lot of
Yes.
organizing happening.
Great. I'm glad to hear that, and that's some of what we'll be talking about tonight.
For sure.
Thanks to those of you who are joining us live. So I'm Dr. Jamie Marich. I'm the founder and director of the Institute for Creative Mindfulness, and especially during the year 2020 when we were kind of shut inside due to the pandemic, I conducted a lot of live casts, and one of the most impactful on me was with our guest tonight, Dr. Orixa Bowers. So Orixa and I go way back. Orisha is a dancing mindfulness facilitator and partner and has facilitated dancing mindfulness trainings. And I always tell the story that when I first met Orisha, she introduced herself as a sex educator in the Bible Belt. And I knew I had a lot to learn from this person. And I really have. Several years ago at our retreat, Orisha did a session on reproductive justice that just, not exaggerating, it blew my mind to hear this content presented in this framework, especially as somebody who really kind of grew up in the pro-life, pro-choice binary. And so in 2020, we did an original interview on reproductive justice, and you can go back on our page a few days. I shared the link for it, and it's on YouTube. And one of our page followers said, "We need to hear from Dr. Risha again," very much with a what now? We're recording this on June 28th, less than a week after the news was officially handed down about the reversal of Roe versus Wade, that protects federal protection on abortion health care. And so let's have a conversation. Orixa, why don't you start by letting some of our listeners know, who you are and what you do in the world.
Sure. I'm Orixa Bowers, and I am by day the National Conference Director for National Harm Reduction Coalition. And I work at the intersection of people who use drugs, people who do sex work, and drug use, right? And empowering people who are in the margins that are working to keep people alive who use drugs and restore people's humanity and dignity. And so, as the conference director, I'm responsible for one of the largest gatherings on harm reduction in the world. And I spend a lot of time listening to people who are also experts on harm reduction and how harm reduction intersects with other movements. And so I'm very excited to be here as a guest tonight to continue our conversation um, on harm reduction and reproductive justice and many other things that'll come up during this talk tonight.
Wonderful. So we have so many people joining us live right now. We have folks from Ohio, Washington, Canada, Washington State, several places in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Miami Beach. So people all around the country and a few international folks. And we do encourage you as this live cast is going, for those of you participating in real time, to share your questions, to share your comments. Just as a safety notice, anything that is abusive, inflammatory, shaming will be either called out or removed. So we encourage you to participate, yet we do engender to create as safe a space as possible for this discussion around autonomy and reproductive justice to happen. So Orixa, I think I want to start in general just by asking, as much as you're willing to share, how you doing? How you feeling in the last several days?
Oh my goodness. So for me, I'm a mom of two daughters and a son, and I'm scared
Hmm.
for them with all of the um, fiercity that a mother can have. Um, I'm a spiritual mother to a lot of their friends, and
Yeah.
so they're afraid, right? And that makes me angry. So I'm feeling some mixed feelings. It pisses me off that we're even in this position to have to defend something that just makes common sense that people should be able to make decisions about their life and about their own bodies. um, and that we're in this space where we have to have conversations about how to continue to be able to do that without interference from other people.
Yeah. And I want to validate that a lot of us listening to this conversation, either now or on the replay, are feeling a lot of things. And my hope and my prayer and my wish is that you have friends like this, or contacts or colleagues, who give you a space to voice those and to continue being a space for you to process what's going on. Because to say that what has happened in the last several days is a trigger is an understatement.
Right.
And it's interesting because we knew a few weeks ago this was probably coming, which started a lot of the boiling in me. And even when it happened, I was kind of pummeled with this dissociative numbness. Like, you knew it was coming. It doesn't suck any less. And it wasn't even that I knew it was coming for weeks, that because I grew up in an ultra religious pro life context, I know this has been the goal of people who oppose reproductive justice and choice all along. And it can fill me with these senses of shame, like, what did I really do enough? And but shame doesn't serve any of us right now. And the real focus of the question and the conversation tonight is the what now. Like you said, the time is now. So for people not familiar, or who didn't watch our first interview together, can you give some definition of what we mean by reproductive justice? Because this is my preferred term in talking about this after knowing Orixa. So Orixa, I'm wondering if you can enlighten us.
Absolutely. So, by definition, reproductive justice means that every person has a human right to decide if and when they will have a baby and the conditions under which they will give birth. They have the human right to decide if they will not have a baby, and options for prevention or terminating a pregnancy, that a person has a human right to parent the children that they already have with the necessary social supports in a safe environment, in healthy communities, and without fear of violence from individuals or the government, and that every person has a human right to express their sexuality and spirituality without violence or shame. And I think that, you know, some might hear that definition and say, well, you just said that people have a right to express their spirituality without interference. But it doesn't just apply to certain people, right? It applies to everyone. Um, and so, whether you are pro whatever, um, I don't have a right to infringe on someone else. And I think for me, that is probably the root of a lot of these
Hmm.
conversations that we're having, is that people feel like their lives are being infringed on by other people,
Yes.
and that sucks.
Yes. Yes. Take a minute to just sit with that, or a moment, because I really think that's the key. Because somebody just said she's a badass, and I agree with that 100 million percent. And you know, Arish, I'm just thinking back so fondly to that time I heard you speak on this live, and so much just connected for me about, this is not only an abortion issue. I mean, yes, that's a big part of what we're talking about, an abortion healthcare issue. I've really taken to changing my vocabulary to refer to it as abortion healthcare, because that's what it is. Um, but it is about having the right and the resources at our disposal if we want to pursue fertility treatments, if we desire to get pregnant. It's about my right to be child free and not be expected or exposed to the shame and judgment of other people. It's also about my right to decide if in my 40s I want to pursue late parenthood. I can do that without shame and judgment. Because, yes, what really is at play here is people imposing their views, whether it be religious, on us, religious or whatnot. And my feelings that so much of this is about religious imposition as a method of power and control. So thank you.
Absolutely. I think that, so many people uh, live in this really tight box around what it means to be a family. And, there is, this hanging our hat on this idea of who God is, and, you know, how God defines family and marriage and all of these different concepts. But the truth is, we have to have the ability to customize our lives. Um, as I mentioned in a previous conversation, like we act like there is no opportunity for people to grow and change and develop. But if you read the scriptures closely enough, you'll see that there was a provision put in place, right? Because it was assumed, or known or predetermined that we would miss the mark, right? And that
Hmm.
provision is grace, mercy,
Hmm.
grace and mercy. Um, and we're absent of that with these kinds of decisions. We're assuming that people don't change, or that they are just stagnated in their thinking. There's no possibility for
Yes.
anything different. And so it's, again, that infringes on people's ability to customize their life and do what they feel they need to do to be their best self.
Yeah. So, Risha, you're the expert on this, and I want to ask you what we most need to talk about first, because I think there's a lot of dimensions that we can explore as we look at this question of what now? Where do we go now? We could look at resources and policy and action, because I know a lot of our listeners are in different states that are under different thumbs right now. So I don't know if we most need to talk about some of that, if we need to talk about the religious angle, if we need to discuss resources. You tell me what's most coming up for you.
Well, whenever you think about reproductive justice or harm reduction as a framework, it centers the individual person. And
Mm,
so for me, the place where I think it's most important for us as individuals engaging in this conversation, whether you're listening or watching this later, is to really be kind to yourself and acknowledge all of the different feelings that you may be having at this moment. Like, don't stay there, but do acknowledge what's happening for you.
mhm,
Because from a trauma informed standpoint, if you don't acknowledge those things, like, how do you go forward in a way
mhm.
that's productive? And so that is what my challenge is to us as people, is to really pause a moment and be kind to ourselves, um, in acknowledging what is happening to you in this moment. I love that you took a breath there because our tendency is to stop breathing
Mhm,
because we can't freaking believe it, you know.
mhm. And I feel we need that reminder. I feel it's all I can do in this moment because I know I'm feeling a trembling in my body from really being in advocacy mode all day. We know we're having this very important conversation now. You and I just came off of another big interview. I was setting up a training and doing some other posting connected to this earlier, while still trying to work and juggle household duties and family duties. And it is because so much of my spirituality is centered around this idea that we are human, and that is the basis of our divinity, that our humanity and our divinity are intertwined. And so we have to take care of our humanity right now.
Yes, we're not robots and we're not toy soldiers. Um, and while it's important to emphasize, yes, we have to take some measures and some steps. I want to be intentional to say that it is okay to pause a moment and actually process what is happening for you as an individual person, who this is landing on, and really have a good handle on that. Because I think that in knowing that, you know which conversations or which actions you can effectively participate in, and which things may cause further harm, right? And so
Yes.
you don't want to martyr yourself, in the name of doing the right thing, right?
Right.
So, like, from a non-striving perspective,
Mm,
that's that mindfulness coming out. But in a non-striving fashion, this is about process too. And so
mhm,
making sure that, like, we are mindful of the processes that we're engaged in and how they
mhm,
can impact us. So, like, we're not stretching ourselves beyond capacity, that we're still resting, we're still hydrating, we're still taking care of our mental health, we're still talking to our therapists and getting with our sister friends or our brother friends or whomever, and taking care of self, because you can't save anybody if you dead, you know,
that's
and
right.
dead on your feet or dead in the grave or what have you. So
Yeah,
just take a moment to figure out what it is that you need to be productive.
right. I know I need a hot bath after this day. That's just what's coming up in terms of a very practical measure. And I'm privileged. I'm grateful that I have the privilege to do that and to take breaths and to have great conversations with someone like you. So assuming we are doing all of this, holding space for our feelings and giving ourselves time, for these rest practices, I know a lot of people have been wanting to pick your brain on, what can be done right now. Because I know, being candid, a huge feeling that has come up for me in all of this, and it's been mounting more and more, is this sense of hopelessness, that there's just so many forces of power and control and abuse that are greater than anything we can do, that I feel like I'm in an apocalyptic war in a lot of ways, and nothing we do is ever going to work. And I know that that's a nihilism that doesn't serve me in the long run. But I am just being honest that that's a lot of what I feel.
Mm.
Um, so I've been wanting to talk to you about knowing policy and knowing advocacy. Where are we at?
We're in a space where, we are challenged to look to each other to organize and mobilize ourselves in community. So we have some opportunities that we can take advantage of. As I've said to others, we never stop educating, right? Because as the days continue to go on, there's still going to be those individuals who need the education about their bodies, about what resources are available, about how to make the most well-informed choices for themselves, and people need to be empowered with that information. So that is an opportunity for us who are knowledgeable about resources, who have the benefits of being in these different movement spaces, that we can share and pass along information as well as cautions, right? So we can help people to be educated about how to seek out services in a way that doesn't put them in harm's way. Um, and sharing, the information that is going around. There's a lot of list serves. There's a lot of groups that folks are formulating. There's a lot of underground resources that are mounting right now. There's funds. There's lots of different things that we can share with folks, information and education wise. So that's one opportunity. For folks who are doing legislative advocacy, as much as you can continue to have conversations like this that really break down what these local laws will look like, because right, the Supreme Court made a decision, but the states are going to have some autonomy in terms of how they're, or if they're going to follow suit. And so it's going to be important for our policy wonks out there to help us to continue to think really quickly and creatively around how to do legislative advocacy and how to understand how our states are going to respond. You mentioned earlier us being in two different
Mm-hmm.
states and how things can look really different, and so that's going to be another piece that we can really help each
Yes.
other with.
And I want to speak to that a little bit because you're in Tennessee. Has your trigger stuff gone into effect yet or no?
Not yet, but
Okay.
there is a word on the street that they're looking at. There were already some pieces of legislation that were in the pipeline that were anti-LGBT,
Right.
that were already suspect, and so
Yeah.
we're seeing a lot of and hearing a lot around what's up next for
Right.
discussion and consideration.
And like somebody just posted here in the comments, like Ohio NASW finally put out some direction for us today. Yeah, they had a really great posting about it on their social media. And I just want to kind of encourage some grace for some of these organizations. Like, yes, it'll take a few days and weeks to get some really good comprehensive guidelines together. Because in a state like Ohio, the ultimate swing state, which has gone more red in recent years, the state where it looks like we're going to have a ban in effect in the coming weeks and months, that there's a lot of legal precariousnesses that many of us really have to be mindful of right now, because we may be dealing, and I don't like this word, but with a witch hunt in states like ours where there is just such impassioned anti-choice work happening that's really fueled by a lot of people with religious indignation, right?
Hmm. Yes.
So yeah, and like Ashley saying here, yeah, that bans at certain points have already been put in effect. That's for certain. I know that's been the case in many states, but we'll probably be looking at a total ban. So one of the things that we have to be mindful of, and I encourage every clinician of this right now, is to look to the direction of your professional organizations like NASW, or specifically the state organization, because
Yes.
so much of this is really on a state to state type of basis. And to look at advocacy that they're doing with legislatures, with not necessarily legislators, but with lawyers who are giving
Yes.
them good guidance on how to act. And if you don't have your own lawyer in place as a clinician and you're impassioned about doing this work, it may be a good idea to get one,
Yes.
to give you the guidance that you're going to need on how you can work within the parameters of the law, and being an advocate. but also knowing what guidelines are in place in your state when there's a conflict between the codes of your ethical profession
Right.
and what the law is telling you, because the major national organizations for clinicians like APA and NASW and American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, I mean, have all come out, just, I'm summarizing here, repulsed by what happened last week, and really stating that it's a slap in the face to the ethical care of individuals, who need this health care. And we have an ethical obligation to
That's right.
guide people in what they need, yet it may really be running up against what now legally our different states are asking us to do. So any
Absolutely.
experience, strength, and hope you can offer in that area.
Absolutely. I want you all to consider organizations like your Drug Policy Alliance, your different If, When, How, some of these other legal ease organizations that do advising and look at policies on an ongoing basis, that are tracking policies to be able to like give you some insight in terms of what you need to look for. You might want to revisit some of your policies and procedures for your different practices and organizations in consultation with some of these folks, like what Jamie was suggesting. Just taking a look at your regs to make sure that if there is some modifications you can make or amendments you can make to your policies that govern your business that you do with folks, making sure you're kind of keeping your stuff up to date with where the
Mhm,
national folks are.
mhm,
But just some other resources in terms of looking at legislative tracking. Um, get in touch with some of your folks and you're on the local level to see, how they're planning on responding to some of this stuff. What are their policy agendas, so that you're able to be like versed in some of that. And I know that that's not everybody's strong suit, but even if you can
mhm,
just get um, just your just some talking points, so that you understand what these policies look like on the ground and how they'll
mhm.
affect people. That's Medicaid, that's all the different um, entities who are approving services and things like that, or reimbursing for services if you take insurances and things like that. Like all of this stuff needs to be, there needs to be conversations around all these different things. What's in the other conversation we talked about mandated reporting and
Mhm,
things that you have to informed consent and those type of policies that you have within your organization. So
mhm.
just making sure that you have some support in making sure you have policies that
Yeah,
are equitable and helpful to people.
right. And we're definitely not here in this live cast to provide you with all the answers, but just some ideas for what to be looking at in the days and weeks. But like Orisha said it, and this is an issue especially for those of us in more, let's face it, draconian states, more conservative states, that there may be mandated reporting. I mean, we know in Texas that's already happening. Um, that you know having to turn people in
Right.
and to get some guidance about best practices and documentation where you're still covered with how you document, but also not exposing one of your clients to further harm
Right.
at the hands of what's happening legally.
Absolutely. I think it's important to go back to a point that you made earlier. This issue isn't just about abortion healthcare. This is about people's right to parent, people who use drugs and their right to parent without being criminalized. This is about folks who are experiencing domestic violence, where their abuser may be using pregnancy as a form of abuse. Like there are so many ways in which we can see um, this impacting people that have very little to do with the abortion itself, right?
Hmm.
But circumstances that surround the need for an abortion. Folks who have, medical concerns where their life may be in danger. Like there's lots of other circumstances where a person might find themselves in need of this service, and with this law being overturned, it can put people at risk for unintended outcomes. So
Hmm.
I want to make sure to name that in the space, that we're not
Hmm.
just talking about someone getting an abortion. Because the truth of the matter is, if you can buy the service
Hmm.
and it's available somewhere, then you still have access.
Right. And somebody's asking here, like, what we're talking about, doesn't it breach confidentiality? Yeah, you would think. And in, as of the moment, it would. But remember that even, as clinicians, we are obligated to break confidentiality if somebody's life is in danger, if the client's life themselves is in danger due to, let's say, a threat of suicide. And typically that threat of danger is highlighted if it is a child or an elder. And we know that a lot of the legislatures at play here see an unborn fetus as a child. And so I think there's going to be more expectations that what we call mandated reporting, happen in more of these states with rigid laws.
Yes.
So, like, to be clear, Arisha and I are not lawyers.
Right.
I'm not even an ethics specialist within, counseling, other than knowing what I have to do. And so stay on top of what your state organizations are guiding you, and give them some time, because they've probably been consulting lawyers the last couple of days. Orisha and I just did another interview that's going to be coming out, probably in the next week, with an ethics specialist who, has been fiercely talking to lawyers and, um, being guided right now. So we're in very strange, we've been in very strange times, but, there's just a lot that will still be revealed in the coming days and
Right.
weeks.
And I want to, I want to be clear too that, while we've had some of these provisions in place to protect confidentiality, we have to be honest that, a lot of this is dictated by, it's subjective. It
Hmm.
depends on the provider. And in a lot of cases, the same things that are put in place to keep people protected often are used to criminalize black and brown people. And
Yes.
so when we're talking about mandated reporting and things like that, and consent, do you consent every time, or is your first consent, everlasting? Like I've seen, in my research and experiences with folks that, the very things that are put in place that are supposed to keep people from experiencing harm have been used to criminalize them. And so,
Hmm.
we can expect to see even more of that now that the decision has come down. And like you said, when it becomes up to states, enforcement is in the hands of people who are,
Yeah.
don't always think about these kinds of things. And I mean, it's just the reality.
So staying on top of what's happening in your state is probably a huge form of action I would recommend, especially if you are a clinician. I hate to be the person that's like, get a lawyer, but if you haven't, I mean, I think that's good advice anyway if you run a business, but, especially somebody who has training in civil rights or guiding clinicians, and, preferably somebody who shares your values. Because I
Yes.
mean, I know we often think, oh yeah, a lawyer with values, but there are good ones out there, and I've worked with them, I've dealt with them. So obviously, if you are in a position of privilege to donate to funds, that is
Yes.
another, action we can take. And, I know I'm supporting a fund right now called Indigenous Women Rising. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the work Orisha's doing if you want to donate, at the end. But, any guidance you can give us on donating to a fund?
Absolutely. There are many, many, many funds that are available for folks to donate to. I'm happy to share a list. Um, you can always donate to the Abortion Care Network, which is a network of independent clinics that provide reproductive health services. You can um, choose to donate to reproductive justice organizations in your area who are assisting women with the additional expenses that they may incur if they are seeking services like transportation, childcare, food, hotel stays, and things like that, that are additional expenses that a person might incur even outside of their procedure itself. So do donate to those organizations that are helping folks and assisting folks in those ways. You can donate to organizations like Provide or National Harm Reduction Coalition, as again, we encounter a lot of organizations
Hmm.
that are working in the intersection of these different movements. And so,
Yep.
while
And
we, wow,
Ash, yeah,
oh yeah, yeah, I will make sure to send
yep.
a list that can be shared out to folks.
And I'll make sure I put it in the notes for this live cast when you could go back on the replay and then also on the YouTube link for this. So, we're having a big question come through that I want to ask, but I also want to emphasize Ashley's point here. Contact your local abortion care clinic and ask to
Yes.
donate to their local fund if there's a
Yes.
local fund in place. And Orisha, in our previous interview, I want to highlight this resource. We talked about how, a lot of the religious right uses the crisis pregnancy center,
Yes.
crisis pregnancy center, pregnancy helpline. There's a lot of evidence of even legitimate healthcare and URLs being hijacked by such
Yes.
organizations, who really have an ulterior motive in place. So can you share with us a resource about like where we can kind of find the legitimacy um, of what's good help and what's, might come with that price?
Absolutely. And I'm going to piggyback on the suggestion of the person who's on the live. You want to get to know your local provider.
Hmm.
They're going to be an excellent resource for you in terms of being able to answer questions about their services and how to access their services. There's also an organization, a national organization called Provide. Inc.
Mm.
And Provide is an organization that works with providers around making impactful non-directive referrals, and they're able to help folks recognize what some of the signs are that you may be dealing with a crisis pregnancy center. They're there to help you make a relationship with your local provider, as well as other support resources that may be needed to support folks who are looking for reproductive health care. So they can tell you about funds in your area. They can tell you about who your abortion care providers are. They can tell you information about how to make effective referrals if you are ambivalent about making referrals, which
Hmm.
we want people to be safe, but we also want people to be able to maintain their own um, values as a person, and so they can
Hmm.
give you some insights and trainings about how to do that.
And we've had a couple comments come through about legislative. I know being in a red
Mm,
state, feel like, what good does it really do to contact my representatives when they already seem to be affirmed and in their positions? There is an election coming up, and I mean, I think it's second nature to encourage people to vote for candidates that support choice, and wherever you can, getting people registered, especially people who may feel indifferent
absolutely.
about the process. And we know that voting rights are under attack, so doing whatever you can to get people to polls and help in that area, like that they're. And even as I say this, it's like I know this is the right thing to do, but I sometimes feel hopeless about, is this really going to get us anywhere? And so I want to hear what you got to say about that, Arisha.
I honestly feel like I totally can understand how folks may feel frustrated about the process and about the effectiveness of the process. But I will say this: if we do nothing, we're absolutely going to get no change, right?
Yes.
And so I would much rather see us take the time and make the effort to do something on the hope that we will be successful. And we have seen where we have been able to use our civic duty as a way to create change. But it's not only about voting, but it is also about voting, knowing your candidates, right, and knowing how they have operated in the past, right, and then holding them accountable for the things that they promise as they're on the election trail, like really staying involved in these various processes, voting at a local level, but also voting, in our larger campaigns. But this particular situation that we're in right now is really going to be affected by our local leadership in these states. And so you're going to want to investigate, ask questions, get involved, go to these town hall meetings so that you can hear from these people about what they're talking about in terms of their response to this, and
Mhm.
hold them accountable. Continue to hold them accountable. Once they get elected, hold them accountable. And there is ways that we can organize and mobilize to do that also. But
Mhm.
I think it's going to mean that we're going to have some relationships with some unlikely partners, right? So if you are a person who is considered an ally, get out there and talk to your community members who are doing reproductive justice work. Find out, a lot of these folks are really well versed actually in policy. Get in touch with them, find out what their policy agenda is and
Mhm.
how they're moving, and get out there and support them.
Mhm.
Support them as they're running for office. A lot of
Mhm.
these folks are running for office, and so it's
Mhm.
important for us to put credible leadership in place and vote these other folks the hell out. you know
So, Arisha, you're a person of faith. I'm a person of faith. And I'm here to tell you, if you're not aware of this yet, that people of faith can be pro reproductive justice, pro choice. That I know for me, I am pro choice because of my faith. And so much of the work I did, like as a person growing up in conservative religion, it was all about shame and power and control. And the more I started to get out from that expression of religion and get trained in trauma, it's like my faith dictates that I promote autonomy. But I think many of us have experiences. I had an experience at a family party over the weekend, like trying to talk to a family member about this. And I know it can get frustrating to kind of run up against the same walls and be like, but, and I wouldn't have even engaged this person if I didn't think there might have been some, willingness to dialogue. But do you have any advice for interfacing with faith communities that may declare themselves as pro-life, interfacing with people in our regular lives who we might try to have conversation with but feel like it's hopeless?
I will use my own strategies for talking to folks, because I often say to people, I'm not here to change your values. I'm just here to offer you a perspective to consider, right?
Yeah.
Because every person has their own lived experience that they're bringing into any conversation. But for me, I often say to people, okay, so what about what happens? We're gonna advocate for having the baby, at all costs. But what happens to that child once they come into the world? Like,
Mhm.
what resources do they have? What chances do they have? What opportunities are there? Looking at the community that they're in, and like really helping people to paint a picture and connect the dots um, around what an unintended pregnancy can do to a person's life, how that can be a traumatic experience, or how the pregnancy can be a crisis for that
Mhm.
individual. I have had someone to frame terminating a pregnancy as, the person they were talking to said that children are gifts, and the individual said to them, well, you can return a gift.
Mhm.
And for me, you know we're never gone. We just return to our original form, right?
Mhm.
And so terminating a pregnancy can be returning the gift
Mhm.
back to the giver, because the giver of life, right,
Mhm.
is something higher and larger than us all. And so it can be returning a gift. It can be an act of returning a gift for a person. And I've seen people get liberation from framing terminating a pregnancy um, in that way.
Mhm.
I think that, different people have different things that resonate with them. But the biggest thing for me in having these conversations has been to ask people to consider what happens after the birth.
Mhm.
What happens to the mom? What happens to the child? What resources are you going to kick in
Mhm.
to make sure that this child that you
Mhm.
say you're protecting, in this family that you say you're protecting and helping, that they're able to thrive. Put your money where your
Yeah.
mouth is.
Yeah. And maybe, I'm going to ask a question that I've been wanting to ask that one of our students asked here and friends. And maybe there will be time for us to talk more about the sexual violence threat of this because, that's
Yes.
something we know that a lot of people in various religions don't want to talk about.
Right.
So Lisa is asking, and I love this question, Lisa, what kind, if any, conversations are happening regarding men's responsibility in all of this? Are they being called out at all to uphold their part in reproductive issues, reproductive justice?
Well, I will say that a part of my work in RJ has been around not only educating girls about their responsibility to know about their bodies and about how to make good decisions about their bodies and about their life, but also young men. And so there's an organization here in Tennessee called Sister Reach that has an amazing program called Brother Reach that does the same parallel work with young males around what it means to have comp sex ed, what it means to honor their bodies. And so tackling topics like hypermasculinity and things like that, talking about informed consent with young people and letting them know, like, consent isn't ongoing in a situation. No means no. All these kinds of things, having these conversations to kind of debunk this hyper masculinity and misogyny that
Hmm.
is sort of like ingrained in young people's minds. And I see that happening in a lot of programs that are reproductive justice centered, that it's not necessarily about focusing on the woman, but it's about focusing on the woman and her family, right?
Hmm.
And her family includes her sons and her boyfriends or her husband, whomever is a part of her family and the people that she touches and cares for. And so I think that for me, that is one way that we can hold people accountable across the board, is to really educate young males and males about some of these concepts, from the standpoint of their responsibility for making good decisions that don't lead to unintended pregnancies for them, because it's an unintended pregnancy for both parties. It's not
Hmm.
just the female or the person who can have a child, but it's for both participants.
Hmm.
And really talking about, as you mentioned, about sexual violence and how, you know, um, this this culture of rape culture and all of these different things that are kind of fueling some of the behavior that we see with young men
Hmm.
and their responsibility that they need to take for
Hmm.
themselves, right? First,
Hmm.
and then for the people that they are encountering with in the world. So I feel like that for me, it always starts for me with education, because I don't assume that because a person reaches a certain age that they've been taught, right? And that
Hmm.
they know these things, or that they know how to have conversations, how to
Hmm.
negotiate condoms and all of these different things. I don't assume that because someone is a certain age that they know this stuff. And so for me, a lot of this for me starts with educating people
Yeah.
and really making it comfortable and safe for people to say what the
Hmm.
hell they don't know.
Right. And I think you and I both have this experience that for people who grow up in many conservative religions, there is no comprehensive sex education. If you may have heard this term purity culture, those
Mm-hmm,
of you who are
mm-hmm,
listening,
mm-hmm.
this idea that it's sex when you're married or no sex at all, and so we don't talk about anything. And it is really this environment that allows sexual predators to thrive.
Right.
And that's a whole other conversation we could have about the amount of sexual abuse and sexual violence that occurs in religious homes and in church
Absolutely.
settings. And I've seen a lot of memeing in the last couple of years, like we're not ready to have that conversation. One that really struck me hard was we are not ready. I think we need to be, to have the conversation about how many women give into sex. It's this act of non-consenting consent, as I call it. And I've been there in relationships where it's a way to protect myself.
Exactly.
is to give in. And unfortunately, there's this narrative in a lot of conservative religious circles where, the baby, the baby, the baby, and upholding the rights. But then there's also an equal amount of shaming that happens when a woman gets pregnant out of wedlock.
Yes.
And yeah, I really feel this is why, it's not the only reason why, but it's one of the many reasons why so many survivors of sexual violence have been extremely triggered.
Exactly.
And not to mention that so many of these bans that are going into a place take out any exceptions for rape or incest or mother's
Yes.
life. Like, what message is that sending to women, really to anybody who can bear children? Yet,
Hmm.
I don't know, Risha. I go to talk and I just get so frustrated and mad. I don't know if anything I'm saying
Yes.
is coming out as cogent.
No, but I mean that's another piece that I feel like opening up dialogue like this and allowing people to really break into those conversations and keeping the conversations going keeps the awareness alive, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, the silence in religious spaces and religious homes is part of what allows those things to permeate. And the more we continue to push these open conversations like this that allow people to hear this information, to begin to hear a different perspective and begin to think differently and interrogate those practices, right? For me, I was raised as in a very religious space, and it was my mom, who was the black sheep, quote
Hmm.
unquote, who was
Hmm.
willing to have those conversations with me about
Hmm.
sex and about pregnancy and about what it meant to be a mom, and that you don't have to, that doesn't have to be the brass ring that you're reaching for, just all of those things. But she was heavily scolded for even having those conversations with her
Hmm.
daughters. And so
Hmm.
I feel like it's these opportunities that allow us to really put this information out and air it so that
Hmm.
folks are able to go back and look at this and hear something or hear a question or hear a perspective that they may not get any other place.
Hmm. So, Arisha, we're running low on official time for the interview, and I'm going to share a lot of the resources you sent me already in the liner notes for this Facebook live cast and on YouTube. But if you had to highlight maybe two or three other resources that you haven't mentioned yet, like I know we've talked before about a period tracking app that does protect privacy. So if you have a few other things you want to throw out here, and then I'll throw out a few as we, lead to close the interview.
Absolutely. I definitely encourage, I'll share that tracker here, the Yuki app. It's spelled EUKI. It was developed by women of color, and it does not share your information with a third party. It is an amazing resource, and it is super duper wonderful. If you're interested in having that resource, I definitely encourage folks who are tracking to consider Yuki. As far as resources around um, where to find services for reproductive health, um, we've already kind of talked about Abortion Care Network, but there's some interesting listservs. There's a Repro Justice group that is available on Facebook, and some other Facebook groups that are available out there depending upon what state you're in. I definitely encourage folks to find their local reproductive justice organizations. um, and you know obviously the National Harm Reduction Coalition, if you are a person who is encountering people who use drugs and you're looking for resources for how to support them, um, please do consider looking at our website, because we have resources there under the resource tab around pregnancy toolkit, how to find syringes, how to find Narcan, all that kind of stuff.
Great. I just shared in the chat on July 29th, Institute for Creative Mindfulness. We just went into gear getting this up today. I am hosting a special edition of my spiritual abuse training. I normally teach it for EMDR therapists, but I'm doing a version of it on July 29th, and we'll record it if you can't come in real time for all human services providers. We're doing it with a pretty significant sliding scale. And we're making it available for free for anybody who directively works in reproductive justice or in abortion care, because so much of my feeling and the lane I can contribute to a lot of this is just how much of a spiritual abuse issue this is. Spiritual abuse, of course, being defined as the use of God, any religious construct to exert power and control over an individual or a group of people. And what has happened, especially with this overturn, and not to mention a few of the other decisions that have come down in recent days, is are examples of what we in the scholarship would call state sanctioned spiritual abuse. And in addition to helping people wade through all the layers of trauma that can go along with this issue, spiritual abuse is one of them as a legitimate expression of trauma. So I went ahead and dropped that link in the chat if you're interested, and I'll have it also on the show notes, on the replay, and on YouTube. Two documentaries that I want to emphasize watching if you are working in human services and you want to get an idea of how we've ended up here. The first is a Netflix documentary called Reversing Roe. It came out in 2018. And it really is an interesting kind of both sides look at the issue, because we interview advocates on both sides of the issue, but it can kind of give you an idea of what you're fighting against if you are somebody who supports choice and reproductive justice. So Reversing Roe, which is a Netflix documentary, and then mine that absolutely tore at my soul is a Hulu documentary excuse me, called AKA Jane Roe. And it's about the story of Norma McCorvey, who was the real life Jane Roe, and how she was kind of used by the pro-choice movement, then by the pro-life movement. And this was like her last years, and kind of where she came, to peace with everything. And it's just riveting, because if you're not convinced that this is an issue of power and control, and you want to see a little bit about how the religious right got to this place, I know both documentaries really kind of show you that. And I really want to end this conversation by emphasizing again, and I know one of the reasons I love going public with Orixa about this is we are spiritual, in a lot of ways, religious people. And, I hate that so much of this dialogue has been pitted as like, oh, people of faith versus the liberal agenda, not true at all, because like I shared already, so much of my faith dictates that I take this position. Yet, there's faith, and then there's kind of beliefs being used as a weapon of power and control, or as a way to feel better about yourself by lording your supremacy over other people, which I think is so much of explains what happens in the movement. And Reversing Roe especially really talks about how one of the reasons the pro-life cause became so in fashion for the religious right is because it wasn't cool to be publicly racist anymore. And that's where advocacy shifted.
Wow. Yeah, I have to say to that comment, definitely I am wholeheartedly a lover of my faith, and I'm driven, led daily. This is my life's work. I've dedicated nearly 30 years to this work already. And um and so I know that it is my purpose in life. I know that it is what I was put here to do. And like Jamie, I'm mandated to do this work in this way that helps to liberate people and restore their humanity, and make help people whole. Um, my dad would say, remember, and not remember in your mind, but remember, or to put back together people. Um, and so for me, I'm hopeful, because of my faith. I'm hopeful that this will allow more people to mobilize and recognize that this is not just about any one group of people or any one gender. This affects all of us, because today we're talking about Roe, but tomorrow we could be talking about something else. We could be having a conversation about something else. We're literally losing our rights, to be whole people. Um, And I don't care what theory you're looking at. I don't care what psychologist or what what scholar you're thinking about. At the top of the pyramid is always self-actualization and the ability to decide for yourself how to be great. And what that means for you. And when we lose our ability to do that, we lose our ability to be whole. Who the hell wants to do that? So this is definitely for me not a break between non-religious and religious people, because I would definitely, by most definitions, be categorized as a religious person. Um, this is about our right to be whole.
Yes. Amen. Amen. I want to publicly say that I want to turn the platform back to you to let people know how they can get in touch with you and perhaps donate to some of your work. Allison Harden just posted. She's also a dancing mindfulness facilitator, friend, person in recovery, someone I trust a lot. I've started a peer support meeting for women in recovery who have had an abortion. If you know someone who needs support, they can call me for the Zoom information. So you can look at Allison in the comments and seek that out. So, Orisha, how can people find you? Is there any part of your work that we can donate to?
Absolutely. So I have a healing practice called Orixa Wellness. It is really Orixa Wellness and Spiritual Center. You can find me at www.orisha, ORIXA, wellness.com. You can also search Orixa Bowers on Open Path Collective. Um, I am a person who is I'm all over Facebook. You can reach me through talking to Jamie or any other Dancing Mindfulness. Go to the Dancing Mindfulness site. I'm there. You can find me. Um, I run a harm reduction works group on Tuesday nights. You can find me there every Tuesday working with people who use drugs. There's so many ways that you can find me. And if you'd like to support the work that I do, just reach out to me and I'll tell you where to send your Cash App or your Venmo, and we'll get it together. But I am so appreciative of all of you for the trust to have this conversation again. I thank you to the person who asked us to come together to have this conversation, follow up. Thank you for the spirit of follow up. And thank you, Jamie, for, you know, allowing me to come on this platform and share and be a part of the solution, to be a voice for people who don't have the privilege to be able to get up here and talk, or the courage to get up here and talk about this.
As ever, I'm so grateful for you, so grateful for our friendship, and onward.
Onward and upward. Ashe.
Ashe, ashe.